started, you're all here for the cemetery tour, right? Good thing. All right.
Not a funeral. Cemetery tour.
Yeah, the Main Street one is way down that way. All right, thank you so much for being here. I think 28. There are 28 of us this evening. This is our first. Yes, give yourselves a round of applause. We are here at Hillgrove Union Cemetery, which was founded in 1863.
Don't ask me.
This was land that was owned by John Treon, one of the founders of the city. He had about 10,000 acres out into this area. At one time, he even owned the Miamisburg Mound, which later Charles Kettering owned, and then he gave it to the city and the state, so that it's now an official national or state monument. Okay. This cemetery has been here since 1863. Treon was not the first person buried here. He didn't die until 1887. But the way I'm kind of piecing this story together is, he said, "Sure, I'll give you the land, but I want the best spot up there on the top of the hill." So that's his spot up there. We'll see that here in a few minutes. I have all kinds of notes here. We may not get to all of the famous deceased on our tour, but we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. How many historical society members do we have?
Not very many. Most of them are.
Okay, before the end of the tour, you want to talk to the people with their hands up?
We'd love to have you all as members.
Here's our treasurer, Carolyn Kilpatrick. You've already spoken to her.
Are you doing a discount or anything?
Discount? Oh my goodness, do we have a discount? What a night for a deal. If you join between now and December as an individual member, you get 2 years basically for the price of one. Everyone says, ooh.
Wow!
Or
Individual membership
you can do a
is
family
$18
membership.
a year.
Same deal.
Wow. How much is it?
You are so great.
$18 for
$18 for an individual. 2 years would be like $30. Did we
it's
say?
like one penny a day, basically. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't get your money's worth out of an $18 membership, I mean, come on. Okay, we're going to go to the silent statue. So what we're going to do is go out of the parking lot here, come around to the right. You'll see a set of stairs because I'll be there pointing them to you, and then we will go up those stairs.
We're dying for this tour.
Did I?
This is the president, Hoover.
Big Miamisburg, yeah.
He's from the
We wanted to put the Hoover Dam in Miamisburg originally, but decided that
We just said, let's not do a dam, we'll let it flood. That was in 1912, is it? That's it, right?
So is this a statue?
Who said that?
it's hard to tell.
This is the monument for George Grove, who was one of our important city founders, or one of the people that carried on after the city founders founded the city. He was born, as so many of our founders were, in Berks County, Pennsylvania, and came to Miamisburg, looks like about 1850. He had a farm for a while. Now, many of you don't know this, or maybe you do if you've been on one of our other tours, but of all things, the land around Miamisburg was really good for growing tobacco. Now, this is 2024, so we don't really think of tobacco as a really important crop, but 200 years ago, it was kind of a big deal. And the soil in the downtown area and across the river and up and down from Miamisburg was really rich and really conducive to growing tobacco. Now, this is pipe and cigar tobacco. All the years I smoked cigarettes, I thought all tobacco was the same. I was wrong. They never grew cigarette tobacco here. One of the things that damaged our tobacco business was all the soldiers returning from the First World War, where they had spent time in the trenches smoking cigarettes that were, that's how the French smoked tobacco. So when they came home, they wanted cigarettes, Of course, then there was the Surgeon General's warning that kind of put a dent in the business too. But a lot of the names that we're going to be talking about today are made some of their fortune from tobacco. And then they had warehouses downtown. That's on our 2nd Street tour. They built big, beautiful 3- and 4-story homes downtown. And they started a lot of the banks and the businesses and invested in one another's businesses and things like that. So George Grove was one of those people, and he married, very conveniently, married the daughter of Jacob Kircher, who is one of the founders of Miamisburg. So
And his home is at the village.
yes, and we conveniently moved his house from where it was on Ferry Street to the Heritage Village by the Gebhardt Tavern. By the way, the coordinator for the Heritage Village is right here, Susan Martin. Give her a round of applause.
Yay!
She said, you know, if we put a banner across the street, we can let people know when the Heritage Village is open. And people come to the Heritage Village. It's fantastic. How many of you have been there? Okay, first Sunday of the month, 2 to 5 in the afternoon. Crafts, cool stuff. One of the oldest buildings in the area is the Gebhardt Tavern, which will play into our story here a little bit later.
And it's free.
And it's free. So, Mr. Grove was county commissioner, and he ran against one of his business partners for a seat on the state House of Representatives. That was Emanuel Schultz, who we'll be talking about in a minute. But then Emanuel Schultz kind of one-upped him and was elected to the National House of Representatives in the 1880s. But I'm getting ahead of the story. Okay, so he was a member of the Lutheran Church, and he was one of the best and most useful citizens of Miamisburg. So there you go. And his descendants also were business owners and investors. He was one of the people who went in with Schultz and also Henry Groby, who we'll be talking about in just a minute because he's buried right there. And the three of them went together and started the very first bank in Miamisburg, which was cleverly titled H. Groby and Company. If you go on our Miamisburg tours, you'll see we're very specific on how we name things. Okay? Years ago, the street that went across the bridge was called Bridge Street. That's right. The park that had the library in it, Library Park. That's right. Before then, it was
City Park.
City Park. That's right. And before then, it was a cemetery. Now, let me mention this to you right now. You'll see these tombstones. Many of them are older than this cemetery. So this was, you know, pretty much unused land, or at least by the settlers here in Miamisburg. And of course, you know, as you're building a town, you always put your cemetery on the outskirts. So the first cemetery was way downtown where the city building is now. Now, when the canal went in, it was going right through the cemetery, which would not be good for a cemetery. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but if you have money, you disinter your relative and you bring their tombstone to the next cemetery, you buy a plot and you put the stone there, and the deceased have a new home. If you don't have quite as much money, you just bring the stone. So you ask, is so-and-so buried here? If their tombstone is older than 1863, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. So again, the next place that the cemetery moved was where the Carnegie Library and the History Center is now, at the corner of Central and 5th Avenue, 5th Street, which was again the outskirts of town. And then as the town expanded out, they have this plot of land here. So some people may still be buried in Veterans Memorial Park, but at least we got their tombstone out of there.
That's good.
Yes. Are they haunted? I don't know. You're in Miamisburg. How many people here live in a haunted house?
I used to.
One person?
I
Okay, used to, that counts.
Yep.
All right, how many of you have lived in Miamisburg for more than 20 years? And your house isn't haunted yet?
I'm working on
Give
it.
it time, yeah. Okay,
I just don't like the
the next person we're going to talk to, we're actually just going to, we'll go up the hill and you'll be able to see it a little bit better. It is the monument for Fred Fox. So moving ahead, let's move up the hill a little bit here and talk about Henry Groby. you can't miss his monument right here. Once everybody joins up here, ask me a question again. Wow, this is
Is that just daylight time?
this is Henry Grove. I think the city council comes up here and cleans this one, right?
That's what I was thinking. Mike, I've seen him out.
Okay, Henry Grovey was one of those people who he was self-taught. He taught himself carpentry. He taught himself to be a contractor. He and his brother David built the St. Jacob Church, at least one of the earliest. I mean, it's been added on to since then. He built the Trinity Church, which was the German Reformed Church initially, corner of Linden Avenue. And he also built the Methodist Episcopal Church, which was where the Masonic Temple is now. And it did not have an Egyptian facade when it was a Methodist church. So he, it seems like he's one of those guys that everything he touched was was granted. Yes. No, he was extremely successful. As I said, he started the first bank in Miamisburg. He had all kinds of property around here. His when he died, he left his wife all kinds of property. You might remember the Groby flower, the greenhouse over there by where Kroger is.
Lumberyard.
That was a relative of Groby. Not one of the more successful Groby businesses, but nevertheless, it was.
We all went there.
It was the family name, yeah. So his bank was. Do you know where the old bank was? The name Groby was on it. Yeah. What do you? It is on North Main Street, which we will be talking about on Saturday on the North Miamisburg tour, which is also brand new this year. So that was a kind of a teaser to go out Saturday on the North Miamisburg tour. Questions about Henry Groby? Anything? Yes.
Not specific to him, but does anybody clean these?
Right. So, other than the city council coming out and cleaning Henry Groby's, we are working on the Gebhardt Church Cemetery right now, which is one of the older cemeteries. And that is, again, we're in Miamisburg. Gebhardt Church Cemetery is on, that's right, corner of Maui. And we have I think about 70% of that done. The plan is to move on to the next cemetery and then the next one and then just continue to cycle through all the cemeteries. Obviously what holds that up as far as getting everything done very quickly is volunteers to do it. But we've had for the past couple of years a lady from Massachusetts come out and actually show everybody how to do it. You know, like you don't use abrasives, you don't use toothpaste, you use cleaners that are made to clean. A lot of these tombstones are sandstone, so you don't want to use anything too abrasive or it's going to be, you know, as smooth as this very quickly. So yes, obviously if you have a family member who's here and you want to clean their stone, I'm sure that the management here wouldn't stop you from doing it, but our plan is to continue moving through the cemeteries and get everything clean. Some of these, like if they're laying down like this, originally they probably wouldn't have been that way. It would have looked more like, well, here's some other ones that are laying down, and that's just where maybe some local animal is digging underneath the tombstone and it's settled a little bit. But you know, one of the things that they've been doing in the Gebhardt Church Cemetery is actually setting those back up to where they were before. And if you haven't been by there, you can tell a difference. It really looks good. And they've been working out there for a couple of years. I think they're about 80% done.
Is that your group or is that the city?
That's from the Historical Society,
Okay.
yes.
Good.
And they always need volunteers. We have a good time.
They have a good time in the cemetery.
Susan's gonna clean her up with her, Susan.
Yeah.
Okay. Let us look for Isaac Treon.
Right there.
Look up.
Isaac Treon was John Treon's brother. Also came here from Pennsylvania and was also a doctor, and he was also a property owner in town. At one time he owned the original building that is where the Rost Bakery was. Do you remember where Edward Jones is now?
It says
Okay.
it
It says Ross on there.
It still said, yeah, the Rost family put that on there. Does anybody remember Ross Bakery? What was your favorite thing from there?
Best cream horns in town.
Cream horns. There you go.
Fresh.
And steak.
What about Star City Bottling?
America.
Remember them? What was your favorite flavor?
Cream soda.
I know you didn't know I was going to ask you that question.
Oh, cream soda was my favorite.
Well, we'll talk about, again, come out Saturday, we'll be talking about Star City. And I think it should be a project that we get the recipe and start making it again, but we've got quite a bit going on already. Okay, any questions about the Treons?
We used to drink 10
We'll
of
talk
those.
about John here in just a minute. Let us move just right over here. Everybody with me? Let me stand over here so I can see all of you too. Okay. This is where some of the Hunt family was buried, but Laura Hunt Kaufman was married to James Kaufman, who was one of the family members that owned the Kaufman Buggy Company, which is one of the big companies here in Miamisburg. Again, everything's a commercial for Saturday. We'll be talking about that on Saturday as well. But you see here, she died at 22 years old. Now, she was the organist at the Methodist Episcopal Church, which was on 2nd Street, okay? And James, her husband, was so distraught when she died at 22 that he spent the money and bought the pipe organ that is still in the building. So that pipe organ is from 1887. She had just given birth about 2 weeks before she died. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind, because we're going to come back to her and her family, her descendants, after a few more 100 yards in this direction. But anyway, she tragically died. Now, for some reason, she's buried here, and her husband is buried a couple of hills over. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So keep Laura in your mind. Now, Emmanuel Schultz, let's go over here to the path. Okay, behind us here, you see the tomb of Emmanuel Schultz. He was the first, and to my knowledge, the only National Congress member who was from Miamisburg. He made his money in tobacco and in farming. He had a house, if you know North Main Street, where that car lot is, and it used to be a gas station years ago. It's at the corner of Ferry Street. That used to be where his house was, which was a beautiful 3-story house, mansard roof, a real mansion. His son-in-law then lived in that house after him. In 1920, they sold it to a company that turned it into a gas station. So we lost one of our big homes. Now, in about 1880 or around then is when Schultz was a member of Congress. And during that time, one of the big bills that came up through Congress and was voted on was to give franking rights to Lucretia Garfield. Who was Lucretia? Lucretia Garfield was the widow of President James Garfield, who was assassinated in July of 1881 at the train station in Washington, D.C. as he was heading out for vacation. Shot twice, didn't die until September. From all the stories that I've read, most likely his doctors killed him because they weren't using sterilized tools or anything, and so it was a kind of a terrible way to go. But one of the things that they voted on was whether they could give Mrs. Garfield franking rights. Does anybody know what that is?
Where you can like mail stuff.
Where you can mail things for free. That's right. That's right. How many people have worked for someone in Congress?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, they had to vote because I imagine she had a lot of correspondence to send out after her husband was slain, and a lot of other business to take care of. Another thing that Congress, and I think it was like the 47th Congress, is very early in the history of Congress. But another thing they voted on was to make use of all the decommissioned Civil War cannons and cannonballs. So you know those pyramids that you see in cemeteries of cannonballs, and then you've got the cannon next to it? That was that Congress that voted on that for at least the first batch of them. Because, you know, the North was churning out quite a bit of iron by the end of the Civil War, so I guess they didn't use all of them. So anyway, a lot of cemeteries, Hamilton, I think Chillicothe got one. Somehow he skipped his hometown. I don't think we got any of those. But, well, there's still time, right? Anyway, so we haven't got a cannon, but he was the guy who helped vote that in to get those monuments. He's not a very well-known person in town, not a lot known about him, other than he was a veteran of the War of 1812. How do I know that? Because we have his service sword from the War of 1812. Right now it's in the History Center, but it belongs to the Masonic Lodge because he was a Mason. You can see the square and compasses right here in what's left of the face of the stone. 1830, he went to Grand Lodge. I think it was in Lancaster, which is by Columbus. Brought back the very first charter for the Masonic Lodge in town in 1830, but the lodge was chartered in 1829, so it is the oldest organization still surviving in town. Okay, so William Derrickson.
He may not be here.
Well, the stone is. Well, he died in the 1870s.
Oh,
I think.
okay.
A lot of these guys lived a really long time, and they all smoked cigars. So I don't know. Maybe we.
You either died early or you lived long.
Yeah, there's no in between. You know. Okay. John Jacob LaRose was a minister, also as it says there, a veteran of the Revolutionary War. And one of the first, I think he was with who were the Lutherans in the crowd? He was one of your ministers? LaRose? At St. Jacob, there's only been about 10 of them in the whole time.
It could have been John, St. John, so Dr. John.
The only gravesite with a fence around it. The only gravesite where he's got his picture on it. And you can see he was also a Mason. So when he died in 1887, and he was like 96 years old, he left his house on Millionaire's Row, another commercial for the tour, came around 2nd Street, went over to the Lutheran Church for a nice ceremony, several eulogies, and then the commandery from downtown in Dayton, which are the Masons that have the big military hats with the feathers on them and the swords and the whole deal. They led a procession up here. I'm assuming there was a path here by then, so they didn't have to bring the casket all the way up the hill like this, but however they got him up here. And then they sang some hymns while they were up here at the top of the hill. So this is the first plot that was designated for a person, although he didn't use it for 25 years. His first wife is buried here, and unlike today, it's because she died. He didn't get divorced. And he and his first wife had no children, but they did adopt about 6 children. And then he and his second wife, well, he got married the second time when he was 84 years old, so
No children?
wasn't thinking so much about having kids yet. No offense to her, but she was a little bit older too. And wealthy in her own right.
And one of their forefathers.
Okay, so John Treon, Peter Treon, his uncle, Emanuel Gebhardt, and Jacob Kircher. There's your 4 founders of the city. They bought up a bunch of plots that were about a 1/5 acre, and down close to the river, on more the northern end of town and along the river, were where the first houses in Miamisburg were. I'm looking right into the sun. Does anybody have any questions?
Name him one more time. Treon, Kircher.
2 Treons,
Okay.
one Gephardt, one Kircher. And you know, it's challenging to find out which Gephardt you're talking about, because sometimes Emmanuel would have a son named Emmanuel, or the first Emmanuel would die and they'd have another son, name him Emmanuel. It's like if the daughter died, there'd be Mary, and then 2 years later there'd be another Mary. So it's kind of a challenge to find which one you're talking about. All right, one of the first ministers in town, one of the ways that he became a Lutheran minister is that he could speak German and English. Up until about 1918, the Lutheran Church had 2 different services, and there weren't German Lutheran churches in this area. A lot of these ministers had to travel a circuit, and you think, well, they only had to drive over to Ellerton, but they were going on horseback, so not quite as easy to get around as it is now. Heinke was actually a military veteran as well, and he served under Napoleon. Now on the notes here it says he served under Napoleon until Waterloo. Well, yeah, I mean after that it wasn't, yeah. Your paycheck bounced after that. So anyway, came to Miamisburg, became a Lutheran minister, and then he named a street after himself. All right, now, Michael Cassidy is a little bit further down the hill here. In this direction. Do we have any attorneys in the group? Okay, good, we can speak freely. Our friend Michael Cassidy was an attorney. His home was the one that is right next to the Dayton Metro Library on Linden Avenue, that nice white house that's right next to the fence there. Originally it was both of those lots, and then that other house that's the bed and breakfast was built in the 20s. But Cassidy was a Civil War veteran, or at least the younger Cassidy. Again, that's what I was talking about earlier. There's a Michael Sr. as well. Michael Jr. was the mayor of Miamisburg in about 1871. And you can see it on the historical Miamisburg website, where I have all the mayors of Miamisburg listed. They would get elected. The next year they would resign because they were assigned postmaster. One guy resigned his office and left town and was never heard from again. So, and I can't find anything about him because I don't know where he went, and all I have is his initials.
Mailed himself somewhere.
Then somebody would, one person would quit because of ill health, so another person would step in, but then he would get named postmaster. Then a third person would be assigned. So it was kind of a tangled mess, keeping mayors in office. Now, the first election for mayor was in what year? Take a guess.
1965.
Good guess. Anyone else? Really? That's only, well, 63. We'll be out here all night. It was actually 1832. And you know where the Plaza Theater is?
Yes.
There used to be a hotel there called the Washington House. We have pictures of it, so we know it was actually there. And in the tavern there, because again, we're in Miamisburg, that's where they had the first election. And the guy's name was that Gooding Halloway? I can't remember the guy's name now that I mentioned it. But anyway, if you look at our website, you'll see all the list of Miamisburg mayors. They weren't all as considerate to historians as Dick Church, who stayed for 28 years and you knew who the mayor was for so long.
And he wasn't the postmaster.
And he wasn't ever the postmaster either. All right. Any questions, comments, or anything about Miamisburg so far?
Is it pretty German
Oh yeah.
to start?
Well, we had breweries, so you know.
Well,
Yeah.
we still have breweries, but.
We do, yes. And again, we'll talk about one of the German Reform ministers here later on. But when the Dora district went in, and we all enjoy the Dora district for whatever reason, there were people complaining online and to the city council and et cetera that you're just going to have a bunch of drunks stumbling through town and it's going to ruin our property value. Well, one of these ministers wrote in his diary in the 1860s he couldn't get any sleep on Saturday night before his Sunday sermon because people were singing and carousing in all the ale houses. So we are consistent people in Miamisburg, as I said. We have our habits and we stick to them. Okay, Now, another person we'll talk about here briefly.
You're one
They,
of two
the
kinds.
door was the no wanted Facebook.
Is our friend Charles Connolly.
We know what that says. What's the logo?
Uh,
There's like a poem behind it.
no, we're gonna have to get our tombstone cleaners out here to take care of that.
Can't clean that.
Put a star next to this one, we'll get it.
No, I'm just kidding.
All right, Charles Connolly was one of those, after the Gebhardts, he managed the Gebhardt Tavern. I don't know if he changed it to the Connolly Tavern or what, but the Gebhardt Tavern was where the Miamisburg trustees had their first election. And Miami Township was founded in 1829, so quite a while ago. The Gebhardt Tavern probably had that new tavern smell back then. Anyway, Charles Connolly left there, went up Main Street, and where Emanuel Schultz built his house, he tore down Connolly's hotel, which was called the Mansion House, which is one of the first places that the Masons in Miamisburg met, was on the third floor, or the upper floor of Charles Connolly's Mansion House. So, here's his tombstone. He died in the 1830s, so we know his tombstone's here.
He's rich though, right?
At least this much.
He might still be under the city building.
He could be, or he could have been in the canal. Yeah,
Oh.
that's right where the canal went through. So, all right. Now, if I'm not mistaken, yes, this tombstone right here. If you've been on Main Street on our tour, and I strongly recommend that you go because it's an awesome tour, you'll see two buildings that say Stocker, A.R. Stocker. That is Andrew Stocker, who was a furniture maker, and he learned his furniture skills from the Bruff family, who had their place on 2nd Street, and then he got his own business on Main Street where he made furniture, cabinets, woodworking of that kind, and like so many other people who were in that business, then he started making coffins. And then he had a funeral home. So he had the furniture place on one side of the street, he had the funeral home on the other side of the street. And then he was also, in the midst of all that, mayor of Miamisburg a few times.
Postmaster?
No, it wasn't postmaster. But he could have had franking rights. I don't know. See how it all ties together? All right. Any questions so far? We are turning the page to talk about, where is it? Charles Baum. Okay, Charles Baum, and then Charles Baum Jr. started the. They also had a hotel. It was called the, cleverly enough, Baum House. The good thing about if you stayed at his place is he had a carriage, and he would ride the carriage across the river to the Bridgeport Railroad Station and pick you up and bring you back to his hotel. That was one of the services that they offered at the Baum Hotel. Now, he originally was the manager of the Miami House, which is now where Taste of Wine is. And if you remember years ago, that's where the Star City dry cleaner was. And Jane's on Main. Does anybody remember the dry cleaner in there?
Yeah.
Does anybody remember when there was the big grapevine that grew in that building? That was before our time. Okay, well, many, many years ago, there was this really big grapevine that grew inside that first floor. And I don't know why somebody took it out, especially because now it's a wine shop. But anyway, all the hotels in town were called houses. So he had the Baum House, and then he built the Baum Opera House after that. And the Baum Opera House was one of the largest of its kind east of the Mississippi because it had seating for up to 800 people. So they could get a lot of the big shows that came through, whatever they were, and they were playing right here in Miamisburg. Plus, it faced First Street and the canal, so it was very, accessible to transportation. And there was a shootout at the Baum Hotel, and Baum was wounded, but I don't know if they caught the guys who shot him, but he did pull through. But there was a shooting there, so that'll probably be part of the crime
Come
tour,
to the crime
right?
tour, yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist
So
yet.
we've got the mafia guy who ordered a pizza, and then we've got Charles Baum got shot in his hotel.
Dang.
So that's the beginnings of the crime tour right there. Okay, the big statue here is Charles Allen's statue, and he was one of the another businessman, also one of the big names in the Methodist Episcopal Church. Originally, the Methodist Church, well, going back, we talked about Hauntingly and LaRose, but there were circuit riders who were coming through Miamisburg, or what was Hull Station on the other side of the river, which is basically a stockade. And there were circuit riders coming through as early as the 1790s to preach. And now I'm not making this up, but according to the Methodist Church history, they said those original circuit riders were spectacularly unsuccessful in finding any converts. Later we know that the Methodist Church caught on, but originally they couldn't find anybody. So eventually the church was where the parking lot is, next to Ron's Pizza, across the brick Ron Holp Way. So that's where the original church was. The parsonage was across the street. Long gone now, of course. But then they bought the property on what was Locust Street, 2nd Street now, and then they bought the lot next to it, so they had room to build a church. And between where the German Reformed Church and the Methodist Episcopal, where the parking lot is now, there used to be a little house there, and I think that was where the maintenance guy lived, and there was a little picket fence around it, but that was many, many years ago. So Charles Allen was one of the leaders in the Methodist Church. He and his wife were also big in the temperance movement. And you know how that went over. But they wanted to ban the sale, the distribution, the consuming of, the discussion about, the dreaming of, anything to do with alcohol they wanted to ban. And yeah, it was voted down by some of those people who were singing on Saturday night in the ale houses. So anyway, Charles Allen, his son later went into business with William Gamble's son, and they started the Acme Boat Company, which was a big business in Miamisburg. Of all the things, when I first heard about it, I said, a folding boat, you've got to be kidding. It doesn't, I'm waiting for the punchline. We used to make folding boats in Miamisburg. The frame folded. It had a cloth waterproof covering over it. The boat itself did not fold, and it didn't fold while you were in it, okay? And it was watertight, and they were sold in the Montgomery Ward catalog for many years.
Sold overseas.
And they were sold, internationally. Somebody was telling us recently that an expedition went up into the Yukon and found a camp, and they had all kinds of Acme folding boats around where they were going out into the rivers and prospecting. So it was his son. Anything about Charles Allen, anything about Hillgrove, anything about Miamisburg so far?
How do you get 800 people into the bomb?
Well, they were smaller back then.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let us continue on in this direction. This is John here. Anyway, there are a lot of rough tombstones in here, and a lot of the city fathers, if you look on Find a Grave, you'll see their death certificate, and the Bruff family took care of their funeral and then interred them out here. Okay, G.W. Weaver was, the Weaver building was where Ross Bakery is now. Weaver, another big name in town. Anyone heard that name before? Okay, well, he's buried here.
start doing
Okay.
crime.
He was broke for a while.
Obviously, William Gamble made a few bucks in his lifetime. His home is the corner. As big as that house is, it's considered kind of an artist home at the time. He was known as a pretty talented horseman, so the place where they keep the hearses now would have been his stable for his horses. And I heard somebody say something about there were some newspaper articles where he would get a new horse and he would gallop around town and show it off and it would get in the newspaper. Must be nice. His son is the one who started the folding boat company. In addition, William Jr. was not quite as outgoing as his father, who seemed to be invested in everything and partnered with everything and civically minded. His son was more quiet and more of a inventor and tinkerer, but he also played the piano. And the story goes that people would gather in the front lawn and listen to him practice the piano in the summer. He would play in the parlor, and then people would sit out on the front lawn and listen to him play. So, and then he would go build some more folding boats. Now, in this very building is the remains, most likely, of Thomas V. Lyons Jr. And that is the Lyons, most likely, of Lyons Road. Now, there are two Thomas V. Lyons who are on Linden Avenue. One is Thomas V. Lyons Sr., who built the house that is at the corner across from Trinity Church on 2nd Street. That way as the crow flies. And the other Thomas V. Lyons is Thomas V. Lyons Jr., who had the house that is at the corner of 6th Street across from the library. So, both of them were mayors of Miamisburg at one time. Thomas V., which stands for Vennard. So those of you who are thinking of having children, Vennard. There's another name we can bring back. Nothing? Okay. Campaigning for our city fathers. Okay. Yeah, the first Thomas V. was mayor in, I think, the 1850s or 1870s. I can't remember. But Thomas Jr. was elected mayor in 1912. So what does that mean?
The flood.
He was the mayor during the 1913 flood. Now, happily, his house was at the corner of 6th Street, and the flood waters didn't really make it that far.
Mother
12
Nature.
trillion gallons of water coming down from Dayton after the levee failed, and all the debris from Dayton washed out everything in Miamisburg and took it down the river. And again, not to take anything away from any of the other tours, but just for your own information, the Big Four Railroad, when they built the railroad line through town, then it comes down south of town and crosses the river. And they built a big embankment which kind of created a funnel. And when all that debris came down the river, it knocked out the bridges, naturally. And then all that debris gathered up, dammed up the water, and flushed it back into town again. So they had a second flood from the south. And Miamisburg, in some newspapers, national newspapers, said, Miamisburg washed off the face of the earth.
We're still here.
Yeah,
Chant started.
Miamisburg pride, right?
Biking up.
So, it was not washed off the face of the earth. Bridgeport across the river virtually washed off the face of the earth. But Miamisburg did survive. Surprisingly, few people were killed. One of the things I heard was a person who was killed was a guy who was drunk and he walked into one of the storefronts and drowned in the storefront of one of the businesses on Main Street, kind of like he was in a fish tank. I don't take that image with you wherever you want, I don't know. But anyway, there were not a lot of deaths in really any of the floods, but the western part of Ohio was hit harder than the eastern part, but the whole state was adversely affected by the 1913 flood. We always think about it's just like Dayton, Miamisburg, Middletown, and Hamilton, but it was everything from Toledo, Youngstown. In fact, the guy who built the organ for the church down in on 2nd Street had his factory. He had a tendency to move around a lot because even though the name of his company was the American Church Organ Company, he liked to play the ponies and mess around with his secretary. So he got divorced a lot and had to skip town ahead of his creditors. So he moved his business quite a bit, and he was down south along the river, and the business was wiped out by the flood. He ended up moving to Virginia, starting up one more business, and I think he finally died there in 1919. So once he relocated with, I think, wife number 3, and maybe Virginia's more forgiving of gambling debts, I don't know, but anyway, by the time he got to Virginia, he did settle down for the last 6 years of his life.
He was too old to do anything else.
Well, you know, that life will burn you out after a while, from what I understand. Okay, now, one of the things that's interesting about this isn't so much the person as you see the symbols up here. And you'll see these a lot in this cemetery and other cemeteries around. Obviously, the guy was a Mason, but then he was also a member of Commandery. That's what the cross, it's inside the crown, inside the cross is the symbol for Commandery, which is another Masonic organization. So a lot of these guys, I mean, at one time, Miamisburg had every fraternal organization you can think of. All the animal groups, you know, the elks, the eagles, the moose, the chickens, the hens, yes. As well as the Junior United Workmen and the Odd Fellows and Knights of Pythias and Daughters of Rebecca and all of them. So the Order of Eastern Star, right, another Masonic organization. They were all here in Miamisburg at one time. About the only thing left is us, the Lions, the Moose, and
Eagles.
and the Eagles, and the Rotary since 1920. All right, so there's our civic history for the day. Let us move forward in this direction. Our 2 graves right here next to the big Kaufman stone, and the other Kaufmans are buried here. These are the Kaufmans of the famous Kaufman Buggy Company. Later on, there was a company called the Enterprise Carriage Company, and Kaufman made the chassis for them, and they actually experimented with making vehicles. How many of you remember the vehicle that was made in Miamisburg, the automobile?
Model T.
Of course you don't, because it was a terrible business failure. But we have one at the History Center, probably the only one on Earth that still runs, although we don't want to insure it, so it's staying inside the building. But it does run. So the Advance 1907, 1908 Advance car that we have was made here in Miamisburg. It was sold here, well, sold in quotes, because it was marketed here in Miamisburg, but nobody in Miamisburg wanted one. So again, kind of a theme here in these last couple of stories I'm telling you. The guy who was running that business also skipped out of town ahead of his creditors, went to Wisconsin, started another car company that was also unsuccessful. So he should have, and his name was Mr. Chrysler. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, so the Kaufmans made buggies, and then their company was right next to the Sycamore Street Bridge. Of course, that whole geography of the area was different because now we put in the canal, and that there was a fire at that factory in the early 1900s, and then of course the flood came through, and it did a substantial damage to that business. So the Kaufman Buggy Company, never mind the fact that they were making buggies into the 20th century, they did not last very far into the 20th century. And as a matter of fact, one of the Kaufmans, they were experimenting with a different vehicle, and one of the Kaufman sons was out with, again, look this up yourself. I'm telling you the way I remember it. This may not be 100% true, but he was out with some young ladies driving through Dayton in this automobile, crashed off the Stewart Street Bridge and was killed, and the family said, we're not building any more of these things. So maybe they missed an opportunity, maybe they did. Anyway, you remember Anna Hunt Kaufman from earlier, okay? Her husband is buried here. This is James A. Kaufman, who was the secretary of the Kaufman Buggy Company, as well as he was the music director at the Methodist Episcopal Church. Now his wife, and of course this is his second wife, Anna, is buried here with him. Now they had 2 children, but remember, Laura died after the first child was born. Now his name was James Lawrence Kaufman. Does that name sound familiar to anybody? He became an admiral in the Navy in World War I and World War II. His son Draper was one of the founders of the Navy SEALs. Everybody. Ooh. You were so good. Thank you so much. We get the best tour groups in Miamisburg. All right, anyway. So those 2 were the namesake of the USS Kaufman, which is a Navy ship. We have photos of it in the History Center. We have joked at board meetings that, you know, how you have military stuff in Veterans Memorial Park. We wanted to sail the USS Kaufman up the Miami River so we could put it in the park. That's probably not going to happen. But anyway, we do have a photo of it. You can look it up online. The USS Kaufman was named after his son, who was raised by her, and then they had 2 more children as well, who were also distinguished in the military. So, why she wasn't buried with him? Well, she was 22. Maybe she was buried with her family at the time. Who knows? But the tragedy had a kind of a happy ending, even though the mother died at the age of 22. And then, of course, Anna was classically trained, so she became the music director at the Methodist Church. So I guess James had a type that he looked for, right?
They didn't want to pay the money. So they're just kind of sitting
If you
back.
don't pay, you just eavesdrop, right? We want our $5. Right. Okay, Ernst Ross was the founder of the bakery, which was where the Edward Jones building is. Well, it still says Rost on the building, but that building was the Weaver building prior to that, and then before that it was a building owned by Isaac Treon, where the Masons met in the 1840s before they moved across the street to the Oddfellows building, which is where Ron's Pizza is. So, Rost, buried here. Again, this is the mysterious tomb of someone named Michael. I can't find any information on this, but if you don't tell anybody, you can look in there and see the damage that was done. Okay, now after the Enterprise, well, we'll talk about the Enterprise Carriage Company and where that building was, but after they built carriages, the Wright Brothers Company actually bought the building, and we had a Wright Brothers factory here in town. Now, 2 things about that are very interesting. Well, first of all, it's the Wright Brothers, so that's kind of cool. But they used to make propellers for the planes. Now, of course, back then they were wooden, and they needed to find a kind of wood that was sturdy enough to spin around at high speed and not fall off, because I don't know a lot about planes, but I'm pretty sure you want your takeoffs to equal your landings. That's the sign of a good pilot. So they used white oak, and there used to be a lot more white oak trees in this area.
They made them all
But the
into
Wright
propellers.
Brothers family came through and bought all the trees from all the farmers, except for one place, which is over there at that park. What is the name of it across from MetLife on 741?
Waldrua.
Yeah, I can never remember the name of it. There are still white oak trees there because the owner of that farm, the owner of that land, said, I will give this to the township if you keep those Wright brothers out and keep these trees up. So we still have white oak trees there. Now, Mr. Pontius here actually worked for the Wright Brothers Company. He was a pilot. Let's move on. Pontius pilot. See, that's
You had to break it down for
what do you
him.
want for $5, right?
That's cool. I wish I did go to that concert.
Did it?
Yeah. They lived over near the plaza.
Oh.
Nice big home.
The book I read about the
Yeah. Wow. Look at that.
It's like a whole other part of it here, but we're just staying here with the Okay, another big name in Miamisburg, obviously, was Catro, who is buried right here. His wife, his family. His son is buried, one of his sons died out west, but I think they brought him back here. His other son died in New York City in the 40s or 50s, and I believe he's buried here as well, but where, I'm not sure. But anyway, Butler County. Anybody here from Butler County? Okay, just me? All right, so he came here from Butler County, and this is not the Catros who had Jimmy the Greeks on Main Street. This is Catro. He was Dutch. And he started out working in a dry goods store and then married Henry Groby's daughter, right? Sarah. So he went to work in Groby's bank. Then later on, as the other investors retired or sold their shares, he bought a portion of the bank. Eventually, he was the first president of the First National Bank of Miamisburg, as well as being an investor and on the board of all the other businesses in town, including the Twine and Cordage Company and all these other ones. He had a big, beautiful house. You know where the post office used to be down on Central Avenue? That was where his house was. It's the city
center now.
yeah, the city center and Parks and Rec have their office in there now. Okay, so that was Catro's house. And again, another one of those big 3-story mansard roof, gorgeous homes. But again, he died in 1919. His first son died in 1909. His wife died in 1907. His son Herbert, who went to New York City, had no children. So they pretty much lost the connection with the city here. So that's one of the reasons that the house eventually went to the church. And then when the United States government wanted to put an official post office here in Miamisburg, they bought that property, tore the house down, but by then it was in really bad shape. And that's where they put the post office in 1940. There is still a remnant of the Catro estate, and that is the building in back, which was their old carriage house, where Star City Bottling used to be, in that alley that's right there off of Maple Street. So a little bit of the tradition carries on, although it doesn't look as much like the house as it used to. But anyway, that's Newton Catro's legacy here in Miamisburg. Any questions at all? Anything? Questions about Sycamore Park? Yes.
Heather.
I'm sorry. All these like little squares, do you know what that is? They just have like initials or just like the last name of
It's just like for the corner.
Yeah, those are where the old markers were. Before they put up the circular signs that are on the poles here. So one of the things we're thinking about doing, I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things we're thinking about doing with the Historical Society, with the permission obviously of the cemetery, we're not just going to come out here on our own, is, and by your interest in this, we'll see what whether we should do it or not. We want to put up like maybe a little pole about 3 or 4 feet high with a QR code on it where you can read about the Catros.
Yeah.
Link all the stuff together.
Because we can put all the mayors of Miamisburg. Many of them are here with us tonight. So one way or another, yes. So they are. That's something we've been talking about doing, and that way, you can do a self-guided tour if you'd like. Of course, I'll come out here as often as you want me to and tell you the stories myself. But just a QR, maybe with a photo. I mean, Catro's an interesting-looking guy. Huge, early 20th century mustache. Really awesome. And he was also the guy who was the president of the bank and he was the first president of the Masonic Temple Association when they were doing the redesign of the building to make it look Egyptian. So that was Catro's idea.
We are very close to having all the locations online.
Oh, there you go.
Very close.
Excellent.
We've been working on that for about 4 years.
Yeah, big project.
It'd be cool to put those on all the houses
You know,
too.
Treon should have thought of that, but there are some, and there's still the signs down on Main Street that say "Here Miamisburg" have QR codes on them. If you scan those, you can listen to a little audio about that building. That was a fun project we did about 2 or 3 years ago. There's also talk about what is the name of that new app? Districts. Thank you. Districts with an X. And that is an app that you can put on your phone, totally free. And as you are going down the street, it will tell you about the business, and maybe there's a coupon to download or something like that. So if you don't have that app yet, take advantage of that. Great-grandparents are buried there, well, okay, small claim to fame. My great-grandfather, who's buried there, worked with Richard Church Sr. to dismantle the greenhouse down in Franklin and bring it up to Miamisburg when Church's Flowers first opened. So there's a little claim to fame. And the person who told me that was Dick Church himself. He goes, "Do you know Alton Ballinger?" And I went, "Wow, I haven't heard that name for years." Yeah, and then he told me that story. And then actually he filled out the rest of our marriage license, and we got married 10 minutes later to my wife and I. So that was a great story to tell right before I got married. But their son, Emerson, was pretty famous in about April of 1950. Now he was, my grandmother, who was his half brother, was always terrified when he would come visit because she thought the police were coming right after him. He wrote a lot of bad checks. He wasn't a model citizen, but he was in jail in Preble County. And I don't know if you remember the old Time magazine where they had that little section at the beginning called Miscellany. And it was always those stories like, a squirrel got in a truck and drove it down a hill or something like that. It was just like 2 lines. Well, this said Preble County, Ohio, the Preble County jail, where Emerson was in jail doing time for writing bad checks or something like that, some sort of small-time criminal activity. And he told the warden about a break, that someone was going to break out of the jail. And while all the guards went to look, he escaped out the other side. And he was only out for like a day or so, but as I said, every time he would come visit, my grandmother would go into hysterics, like, "Oh my God, are the police behind him?" My dad thought it was hilarious. It even made it on the radio. And he said, "Hey, isn't that?" And she said, "Shut up, turn the channel." So anyway, my local claim to fame is right over the hill there. Now, let's talk about some city fathers who made rather than spent money. The last person I want to talk about is William Ryder, who was the mayor of Miamisburg in the early 20th century. Again, we don't have any attorneys here. He was an attorney, but he was a city solicitor for about 20 years, mayor several different terms. One of the youngest people ever elected to go to the Ohio House of Representatives. His father was Isaac Ryder, who was the guy who wrote in his diary complaining about the ale houses. And a copy of that diary, I believe, is still at the Dayton Metro Library because Martha transcribed it, which is pretty cool. So we heard Isaac Ryder stories for years. Now, Isaac was such a good minister that none of his 3 children got married. He terrified them so much about. Now, one of the reasons, you know where the voodoo, backwater voodoo used to be? That little building. Sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's purple, sometimes it's different colors. That was one of the original buildings in Miamisburg. It used to be. It was the first schoolhouse, and the Lutherans had one half, and the German Reformed had another half. Now, there were more reasons than this, but one of the reasons why the German Reformed Church split off and built their own church there at the corner of Linden is because the Lutherans drank wine during communion. Okay, and the German Reformed were not into that, so that's one of the reasons why they split. There were other reasons as well, but William and his 2 sisters lived in a house on 4th Street, which we'll be talking about in a couple of days, and none of them got married. They just kept that house there. They went to the church. If you've been inside Trinity Church, you know that one of the stained glass windows has their name on it. But William Ryder was the mayor in the early 1900s when our Monday Night Club, which was founded in
1893.
1893. Do we have any members of the Monday Night Club here? All right, that counts. That counts. All right, the Monday Night Club was well known for writing papers to one another and lecturing and reading.
Teachers.
What?
The
They were a
early
group of
ones were all
teachers
teachers.
initially, and they were also really good at letter writing. And they didn't want to travel so far to go to a good library to do their research so they could meet it for the Monday Night Club. So they wrote a lot of letters to the City Fathers and to the Carnegie Institute to get money, and then Ryder wrote the letter to get the $10,000 or $12,000 so we could have the Carnegie Library, which was dedicated in July of 1909. So that's one of Ryder's claim to fame, as well as being a very active Mason and again another Masonic guy. So any other questions about anything we've covered tonight? As I said, we can circle around this wonderful cemetery for days and days. Anything at all? The $10 people, you feel like you got $10 worth? Okay, so you're going to come back for the other ones?
The daytime
Even
ones
if
are
you're just
free.
making an empty promise, just say yes.
Yes,
Okay. Wow, thanks. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
70s,
Keep the bodies till they could bury them in this bird.
because as you know, the ground would freeze,
Right. And they couldn't dig the graves.
So it was used to store the.
so you were
Bodies
in literal cold storage
in the
until,
cooler.
yeah.